I don't know when you are listening to this story, whether you are sitting in a peaceful room or in a house full of laughter. But hear me out. There are fathers and mothers, among them myself, who have sacrificed their whole lives for their families, only to be betrayed, drained, and abandoned by their very own flesh and blood like a broken object. Yes, I am not exaggerating. I, a 55-year-old man, poured sweat, blood, and my youth into this family. I once believed that if I worked tirelessly, if I endured hardships, if I always put my wife and children first, then in old age I would be able to sit at the dinner table, smile, and watch my children grow into happiness. I believed I would be comforted by love. But I was wrong. What I received was not gratitude, but the cruelest betrayal. Let me ask you, is there anything more painful than when your wife and children conspire to push you out of the very home you built? When the person you have shared a lifetime with secretly plots with the very children you raised from infancy to lock you away in a nursing home just to seize all your assets? I used to hear stories like this out in society. I used to shake my head and think, impossible. How could children treat their parents that way? How could a lifelong partner be that heartless? And yet, I became a living witness to that bitter truth. There are nights I lay alone in a cold room, my heart torn apart. I asked myself, what did I do wrong? Was it because I trusted too much? Because I gave them everything I had? The answer was simple and bitter. I was wrong to think family ties were unbreakable, that love could be bought with sacrifice. But in this world, sometimes greed outweighs blood. I want to say this loud and clear, so anyone hearing this will remember. Never think that injustice in the family is a private matter to be kept silent. No, silence only makes the wicked stronger and buries the good. I know there are countless parents out there suffering the same. Some are abandoned by their children in nursing homes. Some are tricked into signing papers and lose their houses. Some endure daily scorn and humiliation right in the homes they built. They cry quietly in the dark. They endure. They think, this is my fate. But I tell you, we do not deserve this. No one deserves this. I still remember the day I discovered the truth. My heart was ripped open. It was not just a shock, it was a slap in the soul. That day, I overheard a conversation between my wife and my eldest son. They were discussing how to put me in a private nursing home, where I would be taken care of until the end of my days, while all the property, land, and savings accounts would be in their names. They spoke of me as if I were an old item, an obstacle to be cleared away. Do you know that feeling? Hearing your own loved ones call you a burden? Hearing them plot to remove you for their own convenience? I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash everything. But instead, I stood frozen. Tears streamed down before I could stop them. That feeling, I swear, no one should ever endure. Maybe you think I am weak, a 5-year-old man who once carried an entire family on his shoulders, crying like a child. But put yourself in my place, a lifetime of sacrifice, only to be repaid with betrayal. That pain pierces not just the heart, but chokes the breath. I tell this story not to wallow in self-pity. I tell it because I want you, anyone listening, to open your eyes. Do not let yourself fall into the same fate. Do not let the parents around you be exploited, abandoned, or treated unfairly without anyone daring to speak up. I want my outrage to become your outrage. I want my pain to knock at your heart, to make you understand. Family is not always a safe place. And if we do not dare to speak out, injustice will repeat, again and again, robbing countless people of their dignity. That night, I sat alone, my hands trembling. I looked at my calloused hands that had built and fed this family, and I asked myself, do I deserve to be treated this way? The answer I spoke to myself, no, no one does. Hear me. If you have ever seen parents shouted at, scolded by their children, If you have ever witnessed the elderly being ignored, despised, pushed aside, do not turn away. Speak up. Help them. Because silence is complicity. My story has only just begun. But right here in this first part, I want to stress one truth. Injustice in the family is the cruelest of all injustices, and we cannot be silent. I remember very clearly the early years when I first started a family. Back then, we had nothing but an old car and a cramped rented apartment. Every morning I left for work at dawn and only returned home late at night. My wife held our child waiting by the door, the yellow light spilling from the small window. Some days I was so exhausted I could only hug my child once before collapsing into sleep. Yet my heart still felt warm. The first house I bought was an old wooden place with peeling walls and a leaky roof whenever it rained. It took me many years to finally pay off the debt. By day I worked. By night I repaired it with my own hands, brick by brick, wire by wire. On some winter days my hands grew numb from the icy water, but when I thought of my child sleeping safely in a warm room, my heart felt lighter. When the second child was born, the pressure doubled. I cannot even recall how many jobs I took. Mornings as a construction helper, afternoons waiting tables at a diner, nights driving deliveries. Every small sum of money I scraped together went to good schools for my children. I remember my eldest son's 10th birthday. I couldn't afford the expensive gift he wished for, only a used bicycle I bought from a flea market after months of saving. Yet he hugged me and shouted with joy, "Dad, I have a bike to ride to school now." That smile erased every ounce of fatigue. Years later, when he entered college, I worked myself to the edge of collapse. Once, while delivering goods, I fell asleep at the wheel and nearly caused an accident. Still, the next morning, I told myself I had to keep going, because in my hands was his entire semester's tuition. When I saw him in a cap and gown, standing proudly in the sunlight receiving his diploma, tears fell uncontrollably. I believed I had done the right thing. My family also had warm moments. Every Christmas, we gathered around a small pine tree I cut down from the nearby woods. My wife prepared dinner. The children ran about opening gifts. I simply sat still, watching them laugh, feeling a strange peace in my heart. I thought those images would stay with me for the rest of my life. I always believed my wife was the one companion who could share every hardship. Once, I was bedridden with fever for days from exhaustion. She cooked porridge, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and whispered, "Rest. I've got everything covered." Those words gave me absolute trust. I thought a woman who had endured poverty with me would never change her heart. I gave her everything. The bank accounts, property papers, all my earnings went straight into her hands. I said, "I'll work, you handle the finances. Our family needs someone to manage behind the scenes." I never checked again. I considered it trust, saw her as inseparable from myself. My children grew up under that shelter. I never let them worry about anything. When my youngest daughter wanted to learn dance, I borrowed extra to pay for lessons. When my eldest son wanted a computer for school, I tightened our belts. I thought, as long as they had a future, no sacrifice was too much. Occasionally, friends told me I was a fool. They said, "You work so hard. Will your wife and kids remember?" I only laughed and replied, "Parental sacrifice doesn't need to be recorded. Children are flesh and blood. My wife is my life partner. How can we keep score?" I was certain that love was the one thing that could never betray, and so I lived tirelessly, like a machine built only to work. I turned my life into hundreds of thousands of hours of labor, endless nights of exhaustion, and meager savings. All of it just to buy smiles and happiness for my family. At some point, I thought I could finally rest. Looking at the sturdy home, the grown children, I believed my sacrifices had borne fruit. I had no dreams left except to spend quiet days beside them, but that peace existed only in my imagination. In reality, within the very house I had built with my own hands, hidden calculations had already begun, and I had no idea. But then, when I thought my family had entered a peaceful stage, I began to notice strange things. At first, they were just small, fleeting details, but they piled up day by day, leaving me uneasy. My wife, who once patiently listened to every trivial story I told after a long day of work, suddenly grew cold. Meals were no longer filled with laughter. When I came home, instead of being welcomed by her warm gaze, I saw only a faint, indifferent nod. Sometimes, as soon as I opened my mouth to speak, she would cut me off. Yes, I know already. As if nothing I said mattered anymore. My children also changed. My eldest son, after graduating and starting work, rarely sat down to talk to me. Before, he often sought my advice, from choosing his major to making big life decisions. Now it was as if he lived in his own closed-off world of calculations I could never enter. I still remember once asking him, "How is work, son? Any difficulties?" He only answered curtly, "It's fine, don't worry, Dad," then buried himself in his phone. The way he said it, cold and distant, made me feel like I no longer had a place in his life. My youngest daughter was different. She was still gentle, still called me dear Dad, as always. But I could see in her eyes something hidden. Many times, as I walked past the living room, I saw her whispering with her mother, their voices so low I couldn't hear. But the moment I stepped in, both fell silent, pretending to switch topics. At first, I brushed these signs aside. I told myself maybe everyone changes, maybe children grow distant as they become adults. Maybe couples, after many years, have less to talk about. I had grown used to enduring, used to blaming myself, so I never questioned them. Yet the coldness grew more obvious. My wife began managing all the paperwork more secretly than before. The cabinet that once stood open was now always locked. When I asked, she said, "I'm afraid things will get lost." But I had lived with her my whole life, and I had never seen her this cautious. Sometimes I saw her whispering on the phone, and the moment I approached, she quickly hung up. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. The house was dark, only the kitchen light was on. I paused, hearing my wife and son talking. Their voices were low but urgent, and I caught fragments like transfer, signature, do it quickly. I didn't have time to make sense of it before the sound of a chair scraping echoed, and both stepped out. They looked startled seeing me, then forced a laugh. "Oh, you're home. We were just talking about buying things for the kitchen." I forced a smile, but my heart sank. A vague instinct rose inside. They were hiding something. In the days after, I paid closer attention. I realized my wife no longer asked about my day when I came home. Instead, she spent more time in private conversations with our son. They often went out together, saying they were shopping or visiting the bank, but rarely explained what they had done. Once, I accidentally saw a bank document in her coat pocket, but when I asked, she brushed it off. Just old papers, nothing important. The doubt in me grew, but I didn't want to believe. I forced myself to think, impossible. This is my family, my wife, my children. Surely I am overthinking. Yet the more I tried to reassure myself, the more I felt like an outsider, adrift in the very house I had built. One evening, over dinner, I said, "I plan to renovate the house a little, so the kids will have a better place to live later." No one responded. My son kept his head down over his phone. My wife muttered, "No need, it's a waste." The air grew so heavy it was suffocating. I looked around and saw indifference clearly on their faces. In that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt like an excess in my own family. I will never forget a rainy night. I woke up in the middle of the night for water and heard my wife on the phone. "Yes, he suspects nothing. It's almost done." My heart jolted. I stood frozen in the dark, my chest pounding. I wanted to step in and demand answers, but my legs stiffened. I was afraid. Afraid that if I asked, the answer would confirm my worst fear. From that night on, sleep abandoned me. I lay beside my wife, listening to her steady breathing, while inside me a storm raged. I began to observe more closely, remembering every glance, every word, every smallest detail. Slowly, the whole picture came into focus, no matter how hard I tried to deny it. My family, the place I once thought was my safe haven, was hiding some kind of scheme, and I, the one who had sacrificed everything, suddenly became the outsider, perhaps even the very target of their plans. Since that rainy night, I could no longer sleep in peace. Every morning, when I saw my wife carefully folding clothes into the closet, or when I saw my son quietly shutting his laptop the moment I entered his room, a nameless unease rose inside me. I began to notice every action, every glance, as if invisible walls had suddenly sprung up in this familiar house, separating me from everyone. One Saturday afternoon, I came home earlier than expected. The sun was still shining, and the house was strangely quiet. As I stepped through the door, I heard voices coming from the living room. I froze. My wife's voice was low but clear. "We must act quickly. If we wait too long, he will grow suspicious. The papers are ready. Only the signature is missing." My heart clenched. I pressed my ear against the door, and this time the words were no longer vague. My son answered, his tone firm. "I know, but Dad is difficult. How do we make him sign without questions? Maybe we should say it's for insurance or medical forms. He never reads carefully anyway." I was stunned. Sweat poured down my body. So this was their plan, to trick me into signing documents. Every drop of blood in my veins froze. I gripped the doorframe, barely able to keep myself from collapsing. At that moment, the door creaked open. My youngest daughter appeared, holding a folder in her hands. She froze when she saw me standing there. Her eyes revealed panic. I stared at the folder she clutched and asked, my voice hoarse, "What is that?" No one answered. My wife rushed forward, snatching the folder away and forcing a laugh. "Just bank papers, nothing important." But I had already seen it. On the very first page, bold letters read, "Deed of transfer of property ownership." It was like a bolt of lightning struck me. The whole room spun before my eyes. I could only utter one trembling question. What are you trying to do to me?" My wife avoided my gaze, but my son looked straight into my eyes, cold and detached. "You're old now. You don't understand. It's best if you let us handle things. You just need to rest." Those words were a knife straight to my heart. I, the man who had bent his back for years to raise them, to build this home, was now considered a burden, an outdated relic to be cast aside. I sank into the chair, my vision blurred. Never in my life had I felt so small. The very people I loved most, those I trusted completely, were digging a grave for me while I was still alive. That night I could not eat. I sat alone in my room, the dim light casting my shadow long across the wall. Outside, my wife and children's laughter still rang out, but to me it was harsh, like the mocking voices of strangers. I turned over and over a paper I had managed to slip into my pocket, a duplicate form my daughter had accidentally dropped. On it, my name was already printed as the transferor. Only one signature was needed, and everything I had built would no longer be mine. I bit my lip until it bled. Pain, fury, humiliation, all of it mixed into a suffocating weight on my chest. I wanted to storm out, to accuse them, to scream that they were traitors. But I restrained myself. I knew that if I revealed I had discovered the truth, they would stop at nothing to force me into signing. That night, I could not sleep. I sat staring at the family photos on the wall, the wedding picture with our radiant smiles, the shot of my son clutching his diploma in my arms, the Christmas portrait of the whole family under the pine tree. Memories flooded back, stabbing me like 1,000 knives. I wanted to tear them all down, yet I couldn't, because every moment had once been real. Only human hearts had changed. The next morning, I left the house silently, wandering the streets with my mind in turmoil. I walked aimlessly, letting the wind sweep through my hair, trying not to suffocate. I asked myself, how could I fight against my own family? How could I protect what I had spent a lifetime building when the very hands of my children were plotting to steal it away? But alongside despair, another thought flashed. I could not collapse. If I gave in, everything would truly end. I would lose not only my home and my land, but also the dignity of a father, of a man. I had to find a way. I had to do something to protect myself, even if it was too late. And from that very moment, a new determination flared within me. They had schemed behind my back. They thought I was old, weak, naive, easy to manipulate. But they were wrong. I would not let myself be buried alive in this betrayal. From that morning, when I stepped out onto the street with a heart torn in pieces, everything before my eyes was no longer the same. The familiar streets suddenly felt strange. The passers-by were all busy with their own lives. No one knew that a man was carrying within him a wound invisible to the eye, a wound inflicted by his own family. When I returned home, I quietly stepped across the threshold. My wife looked up briefly, forced a smile, then lowered her gaze back to her phone. My son was outside on the porch, speaking on the phone, his tone full of secrecy. My youngest daughter met my eyes for a moment, then quickly turned away. The house that once had been the place I most longed to return to after a hard day's work had now turned into an iron cage that strangled my heart. I knew I could not continue pretending to be ignorant. But I also knew that if I acted rashly, if I let my emotions explode now, I would fall into a trap. They already had a plan, documents, steps prepared in advance. As for me, if I wanted to keep anything for myself, I had to be calmer than ever. From that day, I changed the way I lived in my own home. I spoke less, pretended to still trust, still be carefree. But in truth, I watched everything. Whenever my wife received a call, I studied her expression. Whenever my son went out, I noted the time. I began rummaging through old folders I had once entrusted to them, hoping to find some clue. One day, while cleaning an old drawer in the garage, I found an envelope fallen from a stack of papers. It bore a bank stamp. Inside was an account statement I had never seen. The numbers on it made me shudder. Nearly all the savings I had built over a lifetime had disappeared from the joint account. I trembled, not because of the money itself, but because I realized I had been excluded from control long ago without ever knowing. I no longer doubted. This was not just some clumsy scheming, but a carefully laid plan. I remembered every time my wife had said, "Just old papers." Every time my son had said, "Dad, don't worry." All of it had been to blind me. That night, I sat alone in the dark, my mind spinning. I thought of leaving, abandoning this house, letting them do as they pleased. But then a flame rose inside me. I had lived my whole life for them. I had poured sweat and tears to build this home. Why should I leave? Why should I bow before betrayal? No, I would not let them succeed so easily. The next day I began to learn about the law. I asked an old friend who had once been a lawyer. I did not speak directly of my situation, only carefully asked about cases where parents were forced to transfer property. My friend looked at me for a long time, as if guessing something, then said, "If you have proof you were tricked into signing or coerced, you can keep your rights. But the most important thing is you must have evidence." From that day, I knew what I had to do. I quietly hid the transfer form I had snatched before in a safe place. I began recording every unusual thing, strange calls, suspicious papers, the attitudes of each person. I felt like a hunter in my own family, both in pain and resolute. One evening, when everyone was asleep, I went to the kitchen for water. As I passed the living room, I saw light leaking from the crack of the door. I gently pushed it open and saw my son sitting with my wife, a stack of papers before them. He said, low but firm, "As soon as Dad signs, Everything will be fine. We must act quickly before he changes his mind. I bit my lip, stepped back, my heart pounding. I knew there was little time left. From then on, I was no longer the kind, naive father they thought. I quietly prepared, step by step. I learned to keep calm, to hide my true feelings. I still smiled, still nodded, but inside I had built a wall of vigilance. Once my wife brought me a stack of papers, saying she needed my signature for medical procedures. I looked straight into her eyes, smiled faintly, and slowly set my pen down, but instead of signing my real name, I scribbled a meaningless scrawl. She frowned slightly, but said nothing. I knew the game between us had begun. In the days that followed, I sought more contact with that lawyer friend. I told him every detail, every piece of evidence I had collected. He fell silent, then said gravely, "You must be very careful. If family members are calculating to this extent, they won't give up easily." I nodded. I understood this battle would not just be about property, but about dignity, about the right to live as a human being. Inside me, the pain was still there, pain from betrayal, pain from memories now stained with lies. But alongside that pain, a fierce determination was growing. I would not let them treat me as an old fool. I would not let myself be erased from my own life. And from that moment I knew the road ahead would be full of storms. But at least I was no longer drowning in despair. I was ready to step into the fight to reclaim justice for myself. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in my house grew more suffocating. I realized my wife and son had decided to accelerate everything. They no longer hid as carefully as before, but instead became more assertive, as if determined to push me down the path they had already paved. One morning, just after breakfast, my wife placed a fresh set of documents in front of me. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were tense. "Sign here, it's just a few small procedures. Let me take care of the family, so you don't have to worry." I forced a faint smile, picked up the pen, and glanced over the papers. On the top, I saw the familiar phrases again. Authorization, transfer. I slowly turned page after page, dragging out the time, then said, "Leave it here. I'll review it carefully later." My wife frowned, her smile stiff. "You're always too cautious. Just sign it now and be done." At that moment, my eldest son stepped out of his room, his tone sharp. "Dad, what's there to check? I already read it. Nothing's wrong. You just need to trust us." I raised my eyes to him. That tone, that look, no longer resembled the boy who once hugged me tight on his graduation day. In his eyes, I was nothing more than an obstacle. I took a deep breath, set the pen down. "I'll review it. What concerns me, I must understand myself." The room felt silent. I could see the irritation flash in their eyes. But I stayed calm, knowing that the more impatient I appeared, the more I would give myself away. That evening, while the family sat at dinner, my wife suddenly spoke, her voice laced with meaning. "You should think ahead. You're old now. Keeping all this property won't do you any good. The children need it. They're the ones with a future to build." I stayed silent, picking up another piece of vegetable, saying nothing. But inside, each word cut me like a knife. To them, I was no longer the head of the family, but just someone standing in the way of what they wanted. The next day, I decided to take a risky step. When my son was out, I entered his room. On the desk lay a stack of papers left carelessly. I opened them. It was a contract with a local real estate company. The contents stated clearly: transfer all house and land ownership to a third party, to borrow capital for a project. My wife's signature was already there. Only mine was missing. It felt like the world collapsed. It wasn't just about seizing my property. They were planning to mortgage the very home I had built. Quickly, I snapped a photo with my old phone, then placed the papers back exactly as I found them. My heart pounded, sweat soaking my shirt, but inside me, a cold clarity emerged. I had proof. That afternoon, as I sat on the porch, my youngest daughter came and sat beside me. She was quiet for a long while, then whispered, "Dad, I don't want this. But Mom and my brother have already arranged everything. Please be careful. Don't sign anything." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were red, as if torn in conflict. I wanted to hug her, to believe that at least one child was still on my side. But I only nodded slightly, saying nothing, afraid that even a word could put her at risk. That night, I lay awake, memories flooding back faces, smiles, laughter. I asked myself, when had they changed? When had ambition outweighed family bonds? I found no answer, only one undeniable truth. I had to act quickly before it was too late. 2 days later, my son returned with a new set of documents, slamming them on my desk. This time, he didn't bother with pretenses, but spoke directly, his tone full of pressure. "Sign it, Dad. This is good for the family. If you don't, the whole plan will collapse. Stop being stubborn." I looked into his eyes. In them, I no longer saw the little boy who once clung to me, only a cold ruthlessness. I refused to sign, pushing the stack back toward him. I've said it before. What involves me, I must decide for myself. Don't force me. His face twisted with anger, his fists clenched. Then he stormed out. The door slammed shut, the echo ringing through the silent house. I knew after this they would no longer have patience. I also knew the real storm was about to break. But I was no longer afraid, because now, in my hands, I held evidence strong enough to turn the tide if I used it wisely. I whispered to myself, "Fine. If you want to push me to the edge, then I will show you I am not so easily broken." After the day, my son threw the stack of documents on the table and stormed off in anger. The house, already heavy with tension, grew darker still. I knew that once patience failed, they would soon resort to harsher measures. I did not have much time left. I began to act. First, I maintained an outward appearance of normalcy, not letting anyone suspect I already knew everything. I still ate with them, still exchanged a few trivial words, still pretended to be the naive old man who could only depend on his children. But inside, every moment I was calculating. I secretly arranged a meeting with my old lawyer friend. This time I told him everything. I spoke of the transfer papers, of the whispered conversations behind my back, of being forced to sign. He remained silent for a long while, then looked straight into my eyes. "You must stay calm. The first thing is to protect your identification documents and the originals. If they get those, they can forge your signature or carry out transactions on their own." His words chilled me. That night, I quietly retrieved my ID card and some key papers, hiding them in a secret place in the shed behind the garden. It was a spot no one ever visited, only I knew. I also carefully placed a few copies into an envelope and gave them to the lawyer. Meanwhile, at home, my wife and son's attitudes became more blatant. They no longer kept up a friendly facade, but instead began applying subtle pressure. My wife constantly repeated, "Just sign and get it over with. Let everything go smoothly." My son said little, but his heavy gaze on me was as intimidating as a threat. One afternoon, as I came in from the garden, I heard my wife on the phone. "He's hesitating too much, but he'll have to sign eventually. I'll find a way." Her voice was sharp, cold, so alien that I shuddered. The woman who once endured hardship with me was now a stranger wearing the mask of kin. I knew that if I continued to stay silent, sooner or later, I would be cornered completely. So I decided I needed more allies. I called my younger sister, the only family member I still trusted. Over the years, we had spoken little, each consumed by our own lives. But when she heard my trembling voice on the phone, she was quiet for a long time, then said, "Brother, I'll come." A few days later, she arrived. I made the excuse of siblings reuniting after a long time, and led her to a small cafe at the end of the street. There, I showed her the photos I had taken and told her everything. Tears streamed down her face. She gripped my hand tightly. "You're not alone. If needed, I'll testify." Her words felt like a pillar for me to lean on. I no longer felt utterly isolated. Back at home, I became even more careful. I hid a small recorder in my shirt pocket, carrying it with me at all times. I waited for the chance to capture their words, living proof that could not be denied. The chance came sooner than I expected. One evening, as the family sat in the living room, my wife slammed a stack of documents onto the table and said bluntly, "If you keep delaying, we won't wait any longer. Sign now. Don't make it difficult." My son added, his voice firm and biting, "Dad, we've already decided. It's useless to resist." I sat silently, staring at their faces, my hand trembling slightly, but in my pocket the recorder was already on. I heard every word, every syllable, carved deep into my heart. Then I feigned a cough and slowly said, "All right, let me think it over." I stood and walked back to my room, but inside I knew I had just secured the most important evidence. In the days that followed, I prepared more carefully. I contacted my lawyer and sent him the recording. After listening, his voice grew heavy. "This is proof of coercion. Very good. Keep staying calm. Don't let them know." I nodded, a mix of pain and grim satisfaction filling me. For years I had trusted blindly, and now that same facade of naivety was my cover to turn the tables. But the closer I came to the truth, the greater the danger loomed. I could see the harshness in my wife's and son's eyes whenever they looked at me. Some nights I heard the door to my room creak open, followed by careful footsteps in the hallway. I lay still, pretending to sleep, my heart pounding. I knew they were ready to do whatever it took. In the darkness, I clenched my fists and told myself, "Come then, I will not let you take what you want so easily." I knew that after the recording had fallen into my hands, it was only a matter of time. Sooner or later, the conflict would explode. And it came faster than I expected. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, my son suddenly pulled a chair and sat across from me. His eyes were cold as steel, his voice low. "Dad, I'll be blunt. Either you sign or you leave this house. Stop challenging us." I looked straight at him, seeing the ruthless determination in his eyes. For a moment I remembered the day he was little, clutching my hand on his first day of school. That image now felt like a distant dream. "Leave this house?" I sneered. "The house I built with my own hands, brick by brick, every dollar earned with sweat. What right do you have to drive me out?" My son was silent for a moment, then answered through clenched teeth. "The right of those who control the future. You're old. You don't understand." I said firmly, "If you think betraying your own father is called the future, then I'd rather grow old and keep my honor than live to watch you become heartless." The conversation ended in suffocating silence. He walked back into the house, slamming the door. I sat there, my heart boiling, knowing their patience was gone. The next day, things escalated. My wife called me to the table, placing a fresh set of documents in front of me, this time with a stranger beside her, a man in a suit, looking like a bank employee. He smiled falsely and said, "Hello, sir. These are just a few simple forms requiring your signature to finalize. After that, everything will be smooth for the family." I glanced down. Again, a contract about transfer of ownership. I raised my head and asked directly, "And if I don't sign?" The man hesitated, but my wife jumped in, her voice sharp. "Stop being stubborn. Just sign so the children can secure their future. What's the point of keeping it? You can't take it with you to the grave." Those words severed the last thread of affection. I laughed bitterly. So this is what my whole life's work is worth, just one signature. I stood, said nothing more, and walked back to my room. Behind me, I heard my wife hiss, "You'll sign whether you want to or not." That night, the house was silent, but I knew the real storm was waiting ahead. I pulled out the recorder, replaying every threatening word they had said. Each sound etched deeper into my resolve. Everything must be exposed. A few days later, the chance came. My son again brought papers, this time not bothering with pretense. He set them on the table, then suddenly gripped my shoulders, his voice harsh. "Sign now, Dad. Don't let this become a mess." I stared into his eyes, unblinking, and said slowly, "If you think threats will make me sign, you're wrong. I am not a coward. And don't forget, every word you've spoken, I've recorded it all." His face drained of color. He released me, stepping back, shock in his eyes. My wife emerged from the kitchen, hearing my words, her face also pale. I pulled the recorder from my pocket and held it up. "This is the proof. Every plan, every coercive word, I've kept it. If you continue, I'll take it to the lawyer, to the court. Don't blame me then." The air thickened. No one spoke. Only the cold ticking of the clock filled the room. I saw the anger, mixed with fear in their eyes. I knew the covert war had now become open confrontation. They would not stop easily. But I had delivered my first warning. That night I locked my door and leaned against the wall, feeling both exhausted and relieved. I had crossed the line from victim to fighter. I did not know what awaited me tomorrow, but at least I was no longer helpless. In the darkness, I told myself, if this is the final battle of my life, then I will fight to the end. For justice, for dignity, so they understand that no one has the right to strip a father of his honor. After the night, I openly revealed the evidence in front of my wife and son. The atmosphere in the house was tense, like a stretched string. They no longer hid their hostility. I could feel it in every glance, every gesture, all filled with anger and unease. But I was no longer afraid. I knew the time had come to step into the light. I could not keep everything in the shadows. The next morning, I contacted my lawyer friend. I arranged to meet him in a small cafe outside the city. Carrying the recorder and the photos of the documents, I sat down, my hand trembling, but my eyes resolute. He listened to the recording, looked at each photo, then said gravely, "You have enough evidence to file a lawsuit. This is no longer just a family matter, but an act of coercion, with signs of abuse and appropriation. But you must be prepared, because when this goes to court, all relationships will shatter." I nodded. The relationships already shattered the moment they plotted to betray me. I have nothing left to lose but my dignity. The lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes serious. "All right, I will help you, but you must be very careful. They will not sit quietly." Returning home, I felt a new current running in my veins. I was no longer just a father who endured. I was ready to fight, and this time I had the law on my side. That afternoon, when my wife again brought the documents, her voice firm, "Sign this. Don't let the children down." I looked her in the eyes and said slowly, "Not only will I not sign, but I will make sure everyone knows what you have done. Just wait." She froze, then laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't dare. Don't forget, in this town, everyone believes in our happy family." I just smiled, saying nothing. Inside, I knew that smile was my declaration of war. The next day, I asked my sister to accompany me to the lawyer's office. There, we officially filed the complaint, complete with all the evidence. When I signed the document, my hand shook, but my heart felt light. I had taken the decisive step. There was no turning back. That evening, when I returned home, I found my wife and son waiting. On the table lay the same stack of papers. My son glared at me, his eyes threatening. "Dad, this is the last chance. If you sign, everything stays quiet. If not," I cut him off, my voice steady. "If not, then what? You'll throw me out on the street? Or make me disappear completely? Say it." The room exploded in tension. My wife leapt up shouting, "You're a fool. Why can't you understand the children? Why cling to everything? Do you think you can win against us?" I slammed my hand down on the table, silencing them. Winning or losing no longer matters. What I need is the truth. And the truth is clear. You want to steal. You want to betray. Then be ready to pay the price in court." Their faces went pale. My son stammered, "Dad, you really intend to take this outside?" I looked straight into his eyes, emphasizing each word. "Yes, exactly that." The house fell into chaos. They screamed, cursed, while I stood still, strangely calm. Because I knew, this time the balance had shifted. I was no longer the prey they could corner. I was the one holding the decisive blow. That night, I locked my room, carefully checking the copies of the documents and the recording. I knew that once the complaint was filed, nothing could remain hidden. Relatives, neighbors, the whole community would see their true faces. I sat down and wrote a few lines in my journal. Tomorrow I may lose everything, my family, my peace, the illusions of the past. But at least I will keep one thing, the truth, and I will not let that truth be buried. When I closed the journal, I felt lighter. Outside, the wind blew across the roof, rustling like a farewell song for the days of silence now gone. The day of the trial came sooner than I expected. The once quiet town now buzzed with the news. A father suing his own wife and son for plotting to seize his property. Some were curious, some sympathetic, and others shook their heads in disapproval. But I no longer cared. I walked slowly into the courtroom, clutching the file in my hand, strangely calm inside. When the recording played in court, every threat, every coercive word cut through the air like a blade. I saw the change on my wife and son's faces. My son lowered his head, sweat dripping onto the papers. My wife sat frozen, her eyes flashing with both anger and despair. My lawyer rose, his voice firm. "Your Honor, this is not a minor family dispute. This is a deliberate plot, carefully calculated to seize the entire property of a father who sacrificed his whole life for them." In the courtroom there were sighs, tearful eyes. I no longer felt shame, only relief that the truth was finally spoken. The judge struck the gavel, his voice ringing. "The court finds that coercion and intent to unlawfully seize property are proven. All transfer procedures are void. Those involved will be penalized according to the law." I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The chatter around me faded, leaving only silence in my heart. I knew I had won, not because I kept the house, but because I reclaimed justice. Walking out of the courthouse, the autumn wind blew, scattering yellow leaves across the road. I felt no gloating, no burning resentment, only sadness for how human hearts had changed, for a home once warm now shattered. Yet I also felt peace. I had stood up, preserved the dignity of a father. I tell this story not to lament my fate, but to send a message to all those who are being oppressed, betrayed, or treated unjustly in their own families. Never stay silent. You may think you are old, weak, or powerless. You may fear being alone, fear losing those once called your flesh and blood. But remember, the truth always carries power. The law, justice, and good people still stand by your side if only you dare to speak. Do not let kinship become the excuse for your submission. Do not let trust be twisted into chains. Whether you are a parent, a child, or anyone else, you deserve respect. If you are listening to me, if you are silently enduring in your own home, have the courage to stand up. Seek those who can help you. Seek the law. Seek justice. Protect yourself before it is too late, because silence sometimes is complicity with evil. I, a father who has walked through most of life, who once naively believed that family bonds were unbreakable, now stand before you to say, be clear-eyed, be strong, and never let anyone trample your dignity. This is the end of my story, with justice served and a powerful call to action for all who hear it.